Hi, Sia, and let's begin our animation. So we've got some really cool, really fun animations here. I think they're all working fairly well. And so here, for the most part, I wanted to talk a bit about the structure and the negative spaces. So with the smoke, you need to understand what does a space mean. And so a space like this simply means that there is a separation in the strands, because the smoke isn't actually a solid block of like smoke. It's a lot of smoke strands, like smoke layers, different flows of particles that are overlapping, and we're simplifying that into like a general mass. So we're basically taking that complexity and simplifying it into something more reasonable. And so, because this is actually just a gap between strands, it follows some kind of logic. It usually either kind of elongates as it goes, or it shrinks depending on the direction of the strands. Like if the strands are going separate directions, the opposite directions, it will obviously open up. And so we go from this to say something more like this. And here is a great example of that. So we've got this negative space, and it opens up as they move. Since they're moving at different speed, this happens. And so it is not separate from the smoke. It's literally the same thing. And so it has to be animated by the same principle. And here you're kind of animating it more like blobs of liquid, which it isn't. So it feels more like it's like a stream of bubbles rather than the smoke rising. Because again, these are gaps between the strands of smoke if we're trying to capture more like real smoke. And so they move like gaps of strands would. So they depend on the strand, like where it moves. Uh, and they will get smaller on or shorter if the gaps are if the strands are like coming towards each other, if they're like overlapping more. And so what we can do here is mostly align these spaces to the logic of the smoke, because right now the smoke is one thing with one motion, and the internal holes, gaps, are a totally different thing with a totally different logic. They kind of come, go, they go smaller, grow. They move on the surface of the smoke as if they're the texture rather than being part of the smoke. And aside from that, the smoke works fine. It moves fine. It has some cool transitions. We can push them. We can make them even cooler. We can push the contrast of the silhouette if we want to. So we can be like, okay, we can push the contrast between left and right. Push some size variety even stronger. Push the angles even stronger. Can do something like this. Smoke doesn't just have to follow super smooth curve, and the super smooth curve doesn't have to follow like one way or only certain way. It can go thicker and then thinner and then thicker again in tiny or not so tiny ways. So we can do stuff like this. a variation. Be bolder with our curves. And then for the internal part. So this is a separation between the strands of smoke. So as it goes, it stretches out, well, depending on like how our curves go. So for example, here, we can let it go in this direction. Then it means we have a strand of smoke going here to the right. And this strand of smoke is going here up. And then we can decide maybe it goes like this. And maybe at some point we decide, well, and it goes there, but we need to transition it there. So maybe it goes, and usually follows the general direction that we established. Curves around, and then until we've got new strand of smoke, or like the other part of strand that's being pushed here. So we need to transition here somewhere. So I feel like we need to start closing this gap sooner. So this strand starts going here. So we're tracking basically this other part of the wave because they're literally the same thing, just different edges of the same wave. And this wave starts going here. Maybe this starts going faster. So we'll get something like this. So it goes up to the right, up to the right, keeps pushing this wave up. So maybe it's raised here, and at this point we just have the separation between the two. And it can stretch even more as it goes, because again, it's a separation of the strands. It's like a gap between two smoke strands moving. We can make it smooth, we can make it sharp, we can make it break, can open up this cut and like let part of like the middle dissipate, but that's pretty much what it does. So it's the same as if you were animating like two smoke strands, and this is the intersection, the gap between them. And so it should follow the surface of the smoke if you want to have something more clear, and stretch out in the same direction as the smoke, because otherwise it will look a bit strange. So if you're stretching it out in this direction, this will look strange. If you're stretching it out along the direction of the smoke, probably will feel fine, even if it's fairly stylized. But it usually works best when it's like really showing the surface of the smoke. So if you imagine like a net or like a mesh around the smoke, describing its volume, describing its surface. Form-wise, it usually works best when it is like that. Next up, also not the best tract, but gives the same idea. So it's a space between several smoke strands. It's moving with them. The other sides inside are moving because it's literally just part of the weave. Next up, here, really cool, really fun animation, something just fun, interesting. I think it would work better if the spread was a bit smaller and if you were giving the smoke a bit more mass. So it's not all that thing. And so we get some like parts of the animation where it really pushes out the energy, really pushes out the form. Say we have this, and then don't cut everything just yet. Maybe just wait a bit more. Cut some stuff, but not everything. And then cut stuff more. Then pushing the silhouette here. And then again, don't cut everything. Keep some mass moving to create this cool transition. Give it some volume, and then you can erase and break it. And then again, still it would make sense to give it some volume and then to transition into like more crazy fun shapes. So it doesn't all become too similar in terms of the thickness, because then it will be hard to make something varied. I wouldn't go to wider arc for like a rocket or something directional. It would make more sense to have stuff more centered, or like you can kind of have a wave, but it doesn't make sense for something pushing smoke fast to be pushing smoke in a big wave, because when something is fast, it's directional. When something is slow, that's when it is like wavy. So normally it would make more sense to push stuff directionally while it's fast and have more varied, more broad motion when things are slow. And then we break stuff up. We want to have some kind of transition, so it's not separate forms, but we need to outline if we are doing a wave. We need to keep some stuff on the transition to show the transitions, imply them, rather than separating the forms fully. This usually helps us read the transition better. And then we can erase stuff. After we get some mass, we can erase stuff. And now we can erase it. So mass first, erase later. Works almost always. Next one. Yeah, this is just an example of cool shapes. This one. Cool scenes, cool ideas. I like the tempo. There are a couple scenes that we can push. Maybe we can add some mass at the start. So again, that it doesn't just has this tentacle of smoke rising, but that we actually have a mass of smoke rising. You can choose a way to do that any way you like. Can open up like a space, or we can just shrink the mass as we go. But something here changing gives it so much more character. I can do like a burst. And the second scene, I think the timings are pretty good. The ideas are pretty good. I like the rhythm. It's a bit more fiery rather than smoky. The smoke would usually be a bit more slow, especially on like the burst. But if we slow down like 1.5 times, I think it would work fine. The other thing that we can really push here is probably dissipations. We can make the particles more varied, leave some stuff here so it's not like fully separated, and like there's one big particle and like a bit confusing trail of small particles that are fairly fast. We might want to slow them down more, and we might want to have some nice leftover medium particles rather than only one big one and a lot of small ones. But that's about it. So I would probably try to keep a bit of that cool connection so that it doesn't become like two masses that are fairly similar in size and nothing else. Having this scene gives it nice contrast. And here it would be nice to have like a medium particle or two. Then we can really push the rotation on this one in the shape. So something like this, just a couple tweaks to make it more interesting. Then we go here, for example, and again, I would do a couple more tweaks here to make it more interesting, because right now we have this line of small particles, medium particles are all here. So we can push this, leave some connection here, some trail, make the difference between these particles bigger. Make the difference here at the bottom bigger. Maybe get some nice turn here. So that I can read this curve. Nice, big, medium, small. Rotating that, maybe we can push the shape a bit more. And here we go. Again, subtle tweaks to make the design stronger. And here again, picking our big, medium, smalls, clarifying directions, making the transition interesting by making the bridge variation more noticeable. And maybe we can make the contrast between these parts even more noticeable. So either pushing this higher up or lower down. Again, subtle tweaks to make the design more interesting. And the other thing that I would try to push is at the start, we create a bit of a similar turn. So notice this cut and this cut. This cut and this cut. So it separates out our design into equal parts, and then we do that again here. We separate it into a similar cut. So I would try to make this shape either this or this, but push the contrast between them so that they're less alike, less similar, and it will be fine. This one, really complex, really fun smoke. There are a couple things that we can push here. I think it's a cool idea. It's a complex idea. What can we do? So something strange occurred. I think it looks fine. If we're aiming for volumetric smoke, we would probably want to push the direction of the motion a bit differently, because volumetric smoke usually has a specific motion, and smoke in general for more realistic motion. So it's being pushed outwards from the center. It rotates like this around itself, gets sucked in here, and it wouldn't be erased like a flat smoke. It would follow kind of the curve a bit more if we're trying to do some volumetric smoke stuff. And I would probably try to avoid creating a perfect spin. So right now I kind of do like this equal spinning scene where it's like rotating in a perfect circle around its axis with two similar forces. So it's kind of doing our spin exercise, which is fine, but it will kind of fight the motion of the smoke going up, because like this perfect circular spin is kind of separated from the actual smoke moving up. Like they're two completely different, completely unrelated motions, rather than the continuation of the motion of like smoke being like pushed from the bottom, from like the rotation here, and being erased. It's more of like this particle just spins around the center, and that's it. So maybe this is what you're reacting to. So it's having these separate scenes that are like influenced by one force each, and this force doesn't affect anything else, and they're just like spinning like spinners, rather than being blown out by the wind, and the wind cutting in this shape and pushing the mass, kind of like which one? Always show this one example. I mean, we can look at this ones too. It's not volumetric, but it has a logical motion and transition. And then there is then there is the other one. I remember it and I still lose it for some reason. I can replicate it though. Where is it? I mean, it's there. I see it. So here we get the smoke, and then there are forces. And the forces, they affect everything. So if you imagine it being like tilted, rotated, in your case. So there is a smoke, and then the force comes in, and it affects everything. So it's a force like that. It turns the smoke, cuts in, rotates this, pushes this, and it's like pushing like that. So it's like a field of force. It's the same principle, the same guiding turbulence. rather than this a center and we spin around it. Second particle is a center, we spin around it. It's more of like there is an overarching force, a principle that affects it and that guides the motion. And there can be a couple of these forces, but they're not separate. They affect each other. And if the particle, for example, is affected by both forces, then it means that it will receive the push from both sides rather than just like one affecting one scene, the other one affecting the other scene. Trying to fit through the form, delaying some parts. As it gets pushed out, again, remember the force pushing it out and then rotating inwards. That's what happens. And then this force is what causes the rotation. So let's say we arrived here. Now we've got this strong foundation, we've got these masses, get all the cool stuff. And then I want to start erasing it. Okay, I moved it too far. First, we already slowed down. So we need to keep that slow down. Second, we can start erasing it here. Yeah, there is a force here. But it will not just push this. And if it's erasing from the top, then we don't want to have the equal force erasing from the bottom as well. As you see here, so we kind of go 1, 2, a bit erasing from the top. Then we get kind of a similar amount of from the top and the bottom, and we equally erase it like into the center, and this just remains a perfect circle, completely separated from everything else. And these particles kind of rotate around the center and also separate out rather than creating like a more unified common silhouette. The same thing happens with this particle where has some volume, and then we get into this same amount of cutting from the sides and not cutting at all and changing shape vertically. So what we need to do is we need to pick a force that will be the dominant force and figure out how it will influence the animation. So there's a force coming here, it will rotate our particles here, it can rotate, erase like that. Maybe there is a force coming this way, it will spin here like that, it will cut in here like that. This will go, for example, like this. This will go like this. This will go like that. So things like that. There is an overall structure, and then we can have like quite a bit of variety within it. But the general composition, the general change should follow some kind of structure to give that effect of like the overall force guiding the object rather than a bunch of separate scenes cutting in that are not connected to each other and don't relate to each other in any way. And it is not simple at all, especially if you want to show the volume, because aside from these forces just having that careful balance and variation, you also need to follow the volume of the object when you're erasing it. Otherwise, it won't be volumetric because the volume is created from these cuts following the surface of the smoke. So kind of creating a map like this is the surface of this volume. And we need to cut it according to that, otherwise it will just be flat smoke, no matter how many layers of shading we draw. Because it's not in the shading that we see the volume, it's in the consistency of the surface. Force like this, cuts in. Okay, I'm repeating the motion. It's not good. Maybe it would be better if this rotates more in this direction. Get turning. Can keep erasing it, but it's also turning in this direction. Following this overarching motion. Maybe this can even be pushing out some mass forward and up. But I'm trying to describe volumes with this kind of shapes. I don't know. We can make it more volumetric if we account for the surface even more. So this is surface like that. Maybe some stuff goes and follows more of that curve as well. This side of the smoke. And if I also make it kind of expand, this will make it even more like, it will sell the idea of it being like push from the inside even more, because then we'll see that it's kind of been pushed from the inside and erased and all that. Then it can shrink again when it's been cut inwards. So it's stuff like this. It's not easy to nail down, but having this general force rather than separating everything usually helps to create something more volumetric, more connected, and more impactful. And of course, I just animated separately one part, and it influences everything. So you need to figure out what to do at the bottom too. So it wouldn't just push one part, it will affect the other part too. And of course with a delay, and they can combine and they can create all the kind of cool, crazy stuff. So it really is an exercise. It's like thinking through stuff and figuring out how to connect it design-wise and form-wise, and to build like a system of forces rather than a separate thing. So we create a composition of sort, like how to place these scenes to create a cool, interesting silhouette, and then also how to make sure that they don't like stack like horizontally or vertically, while fully separating from the other stuff. So we kind of want a puzzle piece that leads us to the full composition rather than scenes being perfectly separated out. So scenes like that, rather than separating each element out. And we want to have this general kind of motion, which is pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie. Especially if you want something more volumetric, it is very tough to pull out. But it's possible. And I wish you good luck with your animations, and I see you later. Bye bye.